This webinar today is utilizing JD Edwards user-defined codes, aka UDCs, for reporting and analytics. There's anyone that's throughout the presentation, if there's any questions, there's a questions in the Q&A panel. I think you can see to your right-hand side. So go ahead and ask any questions there. We'll handle the Q&As towards the end. Also, we're going to be doing a drawing for a $50 Amazon gift card, so everybody please stay to the end. That's all we ask for I guess, to win those gift cards. So let me introduce Ben. So Ben is our BI Solutions Architect here with Preferred Strategies. He has decades of experience managing JD Edwards data from both an applications and our operations level. So I'm excited to have Ben do this presentation today. So Ben, I'm going to pass it over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Joe. And I'm going to get started. And decades of experience. I'm going to betray myself again with my next slide here, because this is something of interest to me that happened in 1979 when I was still a teenager. And 3 Mile Island, I don't know if anyone on the call is familiar with it, but it's a nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania, and they had a partial meltdown of that nuclear reactor that changed the course of nuclear power in America. It became a very pivotal point in making decisions about it. And I'm not, what I'm interested in it is the stuck valve opened. So one of the things that happened, a lot of things contributed to this accident, but one of the things was that they had a stuck valve, but in the indicator room, the light was confusing, right? There's a hidden indicator light that made the operator think that the emergency cooling system had to be overwritten, right? So there's confusion. And I guess here's my point. UDCs and CAT codes in JD Edwards are not as important as a stuck valve in a nuclear power plant, but they are the things that indicate to your company how things are going, what's happening. And so they need to be clear. As you create a user-defined code, those become the primary ways that you slice and dice your business. So if there's anything ambiguous about the meaning of a CAT code, then it's going to lead to confusion eventually as executives are trying to make decisions. So let's move on. I'm going to do a quick, here's our agenda for today. I'm going to do a quick description of Preferred Strategies and what we do. We're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about user-defined codes and their design choices and how kind of lessons learned I've learned over the decades, as Joe mentioned. I'm going to show you some examples in our tool set of how those user-defined codes actually then work in a reporting analytics session. Then I'm going to summarize with some lessons learned about maybe best practices, things I would recommend that you do, and things that you maybe don't do. So moving on, Preferred Strategies. We've been dedicated to business intelligence for 17 years. We got our start just working originally with Crystal Reports and JD Edwards, and have expanded kind of our business analytics capacity over time. What we've really discovered is that we work best when we're working with a company that values data, that they want to invest in becoming this data-driven business, and they believe that kind of deep down in their hearts. This is a journey. Actually, people always say implementing an ERP system is a difficult thing. Becoming data-driven is not trivial, but it is a worthwhile journey that has big payoff. And our partnerships, I think, with our best customers are the ones who have believe in this journey as well as we do. So, user-defined codes. What I really want to emphasize today is that you can't design user-defined codes without thinking about how you're going to maintain and validate them, and what reporting tool, data model are you going to use. Right, the design of your codes tremendously enhance or get in the way of your reporting tools, and the design of your codes done improperly will be very difficult to maintain and validate. Your processes of assigning codes can be either easier or harder depending on how you design them, and there's trade-offs on each of those. So that's kind of the theme of what I want you guys to leave with today. Just getting started right away, kind of the simplest and most common way people use the UDC codes in JD Edwards are just a single meaning for each category. It's very easy, it's very powerful. So you might have on the business unit master, kind of a category that's the business unit there in the first column, and maybe you've categorized division or public or private and market code, things that you want to say about the business unit. I apologize up front that a lot of my examples today are going to be from a construction background. That's the framework where I came from when I worked at a company that used JD Edwards. So business unit master has different category codes you might assign. So most common, you'll do it this way, but it does beg some interesting questions. So notice that I've got a market code, freeway, and I've got a column, public-private. Is there such a thing as a private freeway? Maybe there is, but if I just assign one meaning to each category code, there's nothing that stops me from getting potentially confusing category codes or conflicting category codes. If you look at the OSIP code there, the insurance code OSIP, if that code is blank, does that mean it's not an OSIP, or does it mean that they just forgot to code it, right? OSIPs being a particular type of owner-controlled insurance program. But so the idea of having one code and each code having a specific meaning is, again, very easy to design and easy to implement, but it does present this idea of what about mistakes? How do I know that I've got all the OSIPs done? How do I know that I haven't made a conflict between one code and the next code that maybe are physically impossible? Another question there is, I've got public and private. It's a binary, it is either public or private. In the construction space, the company I used to work for, we had plenty of things that were neither. In this case, the South Business Unit 3001 is an overhead business unit. So it's not an outside job that I'm doing for somebody, but it's an overhead structure. So there is no public and private. So I need to plan, what am I going to do with the codes that don't apply to business units or accounts that aren't part of that particular subject, right? So again, that's part of the thinking through the designing. How am I going to cover these things? Because blank codes can end cause confusion, right? What is the real setup there? So another element would be the codes themselves. When you create a code, in this case, I've got the division description, the division code. The first column there, those are just numbers. They're numbers in a certain sequence. They have no particular meaning, just 10, 20, and 30. So there's good reason to have no meaning, but on your data input, when people are signing codes, it sometimes is more confusing about which code to assign. Obviously, usually you'll be able to validate that as it's being keyed in, but if you're doing a massive spreadsheet upload, there's no validation at that moment. And so the idea of not having meaning to the code has some downsides, but it is also useful in sorting, and we'll talk about kind of codes and sorting in a few more slides. The other option would be in the public-private, where maybe I do have a meaning, right? I have public PUB and private PVT. And so someone looking at the code themselves, if I don't have the description, the code itself helps me know what it is. And so there are certain categories of codes, particularly I think codes that have very few meanings. In this case, public and private, there's really two versions of it. It makes sense to maybe try to give that some meaning as opposed to just one and two, or something that you can't use P, obviously, because public and private both start with P. But again, assigning meaning is really useful at some times. And notice that I have created an NA as a valid category code, because there's times when it's not applicable. The beauty of that is if there's ever a code that's blank, I know that someone's not looked at it. Again, that's one of the lessons learned I'll reiterate later on, is blank codes are an element of confusion. You probably want to make sure you've designed your category code so that you don't ever have blanks. All right, let's look at the next idea. And in this case, you might have codes that have multiple meanings, right? So I might have on business unit north, but for that 1,000, it's a public OSIP. That's in my example before. I had a public private code and an insurance code, and maybe I want to combine those because there is no such thing as a private or a public OSIP, or some combination that's not valid. In this case, maybe on the market code, there's no such thing as a freeway multi-floor. Well, in fact, there is, because California's had them and they've fallen down. But get the idea that sometimes if you're worried about conflicting codes being set up that are nonsensical, that would not be compatible, you might want to combine those codes into a single code that has only valid choices out of it. Right? That way you won't have anything set up that's conflicting. So again, very, very good on the validation setup point of view, where you're going to say, I always have to have a value there. It's never blank, but all the values that are possible are coded out specifically. The downside of this is when I want to report on market code, I might want to be able to say report on office alone, or report on multi-floor or one floor, right? So I'm going to need to know that in my reporting tool, the place I'm going to be doing the reporting, that I can parse that code and I can parse it consistently. So I would say one of the things you want to do is, if you're making those codes, combining them, you're going to want to make sure that there's either delimiter between the first part of the code or the second code, or the first part of the code is always 3 digits and the second part of the code is always 4 digits. Some way that parsing those codes is much more easy and powerful. So again, this is another approach. It's more complicated. Its real strength is in the data validation, the input, to make sure that you're putting in codes that actually are sensible to your business. So let's think about putting these together. Another challenge that companies come up with, and I've dealt with this in my own work, is the idea that I need to actually coordinate codes between different dimension tables. So I might, on my business unit master, particularly if I'm a construction company, I've got an underground superintendent, a paving superintendent, and a graving superintendent. And I can kind of divide, I can assign those people at the business unit, so I know who they are. Bob's the underground superintendent on the Ace Hardware building. But what I really want to be able to do is analyze the account cat codes on the cost spent and the budgets, whether you're over budget or under budget. And so I need to have another code on the account that's going to let me join the underground to the underground superintendent code. And I'll do that obviously in my reporting tool. But again, I have to plan in advance how these codes are going to work together to give me the insight that I'm looking for. And when done well, you greatly enhance the analytics capability of your solution, because I can then understand where in specific accounts and who specifically for different products I'm over budget, under budget, on schedule, behind schedule, whatever that case may be. One of the things I would mention, if you're going to do account cat codes, we recommend using the account master, not trying to keep track of the account codes at every account. Obviously, as business units expand, your 901 file gets big, and managing all the details of account codes at each individual account level is tough. It's really tough to do without some specific tools or skills. But if you do it at the account master level and say that those account cat codes apply across your company, then you really simplify managing those codes. So we do recommend you do it that way. Okay, so another thing that you might be able to do in your account cat codes is use your reporting tool to expand your codes, right? So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that your cat code that you use in JD Edwards doesn't have to be limited to that cat code. You can extend and create derived cat codes, and there's specific reasons to do that, and I'll show you an example when we get into the actual reporting tool on our general ledger. But pretend you've got a product in your sales group, leather glove, leather hat, and you know in the reporting you're going to want to summarize by leather or by cotton or by nylon. You can actually create then in that reporting tool kind of these additional cat codes that don't exist in JD Edwards that greatly enhance the speed at which the reporting tool responds. That's because the reporting tool probably is running in memory. It probably can be optimized, and the formulas that say, give me the sum or bring me back all the products that are leather, will read a 1 and a 0 much faster than you can do an if then L, if it's L or if it's C. So again, creating these extended meanings to your cat codes can greatly improve the end user experience with using the cat codes to understand their business and analyze their business. So keep that in mind, that when you're designing a cat code, think of the ways you might expand that cat code to have additional meaning or additional reporting capabilities. And again, I'll give you an example in the general ledger when we get to the samples. Okay, so another thing we found very, very helpful to us is general ledger hierarchies, right? So we have a recommended process where you might be setting up account codes on your 901 that you want to use to drive your balance sheet or your income statement. And their methodology of doing that is really helpful. So we might have, maybe in this case, account cat code. Pretend that was kind of account cat code level 01, and there might be another level 02. So you might define those by object ranges 1000 through 1999 are account cat code 100, and that is assets. I might have another account code that is account code 2 that breaks down assets and liabilities to the next level. So these are our hierarchies, and I'm going to show you the next screen is a screenshot of the hierarchies, and I'll also show you how those work in process in our Power BI sample. But again, these codes could be defined by range, or they could be defined by actual individual cat codes on that account master. The value of doing it at the account master and the account cat codes is that an end user using JD Edwards can probably manage those cat codes themselves. If you need to make a change, you need to update something new, maybe create a new category. If you're using code, SQL code, to create the range 1000 through 1999, you're probably going to need to involve a programmer or somebody who can get to the scripts that set up your reports. But if you just manage it in the account codes, it really gives a lot more power to someone in finance to make those decisions. So I guess the short answer is we recommend using cat codes to create these hierarchies. It's the best practice, but it's not the only way to do it. And there's other good choices as well. So here's kind of a screenshot of what that looks like in an Excel basis. One of the things that you'll notice is on the right-hand side of the screen, you've got kind of this balance sheet level 1, 2, 3, and 4. We'll see those same fields again in a moment. When we've built the tools that we use, one of our strengths is that the model's the same no matter what reporting tool we're using. So it gives us really powerful data provenance, right? So every report that refers to balance sheet level 1 is looking at the exact same data set. So you kind of eliminate the idea that I have to manage these things in multiple places. We'd recommend that you manage your account codes in one place, and that drives all your reports, and it makes reconciliation much easier. But the idea here again is you got these levels. In my previous sheet, I had a level of assets, then below that you might have current assets, below that you might have cash. Each one of those would represent a cat code, and those would be represented by that balance sheet level 1, balance sheet level 2, balance sheet level 3, that over in the right-hand side. So again, hierarchies can be really powerful. Creating hierarchies can be challenging. If you've bothered to develop your level of detail out within the account master in JD Edwards, there's the table you might want to know about, and it's the F100-901. It is an exploded view of your level of detail table, and it's really useful in building out a hierarchy if that happens to be something that you've done. Moving on, kind of some more lessons learned is the idea that you could use the second description to do some sorting of code. So maybe you want to have an expense code of 10, 20, 30 as a cat code you'd be setting up. You've got a description for those codes, but maybe you want to sort them in a specific order in reports. So you could use a separate code for that, but within JD Edwards, there's a second description, and you actually might just use that to define the sort order. In this case, salaries would come first, this sort order 100. Then office would come second, sort of 200, you get the idea. So that's really helpful because you're defining these codes and the first description, the second description, all in one place. So it's easy to manage, easy to kind of take care of it all in one fell swoop, as opposed to trying to coordinate two different cat codes, one for the code itself and one for the sort order. One thing to be wary of, some tools will not like it if you have two sort orders. So that's that idea where computers is sort order 100 also, where you might think, well, I have expense code 70 and the sort code would follow after that. The metaphor people always like to use when describing why this doesn't work is you can sort cities by region, but you can't sort regions by city. And so I had to think about that the first time I heard it, but it does make sense. If you're saying sort by 100, but I want to sort these words in a certain order, it doesn't know what to do. It cannot calculate that, so that will throw up an error. So the only point here is be cautious about sort order and make sure you've built enough room in there so that you can have a unique sort position for each code that you need. Okay, so I'm going to go in now to our reporting tool and kind of look at some of these examples, show you how they work out in real business. I'm going to start in a GL report that looks at this. I'm going to talk a little bit about reports and how we see them and use them, but not too much time. Hopefully this will be useful to you. I'm starting in a tool called the Power BI web service. This is the web service that reports sit in. They feed your JD Edwards data out to the web. What that really means is I can get these reports on anywhere, anytime, either through the web or on apps on my phone or my tablet, right? So very, very portable. But with that portability, you want to have that same analysis that you'd have if you're sitting in your business. So that's where these codes come in. We're saying here, in case I've got a region code, central, division, product line, and I might be able to say, well, just show me the central region. I've created these codes so that they're reasonable, they're sensible. I've made sure that it's named well, so the end user understands exactly what it is. So you want to make sure that your codes, again, back to that 3 Mile Island, there should never be confusion about what does the code mean, right? So think of the naming, make sure that the naming and terms are used that make sense to your audience, and so they understand exactly what we're looking at as we click through them. So codes are used for slicing and dicing. There's no particular mystery about that. One of the things that kind of modern tools are doing these days is that you not only can sort by maybe a slicer type thing, either in Excel or Power BI, but the actual graphs themselves have become slicers, right? So I can actually go through here and pick the Blu-rays, and those become slicers themselves. The point about this is that kind of an old school method would be that slicers and the way I want to use my codes to analyze my business, you used to think of them in this way, right? Of a target or a graph or a table to choose what you want. But in fact, the tools now allow you to use the visuals themselves to become the cat codes that you slice and dice. And that makes it really powerful, very helpful, I think. So again, the idea in this case, these are codes that follow that traditional methodology, right? Where I've got one region, I got one code region, I got one meaning for it. I'm not having to do any slicing and dicing. In the product line code, I actually might have then slicing and dicing, right? Where I want to break down 3G reporting, 4G reporting, maybe Blu-ray. So this is where this is a description, but I'd want to have in the code behind it this be parsable, right? To where the code, I could say, give me all my 4Gs, give me all my Blu-ray, and I might want to have something like that on the product line slicer. So again, that's the design that you want to start thinking through of how am I going to use this to get insight into my business. If your codes aren't driving valid insights, then we've probably not done a good job setting them up. But if your codes are driving valid insights, the idea of being able to slice and dice across multiple category codes and blending those codes, even across, as I mentioned before, general ledger to business unit to equipment, that's when you're going to see those remarkable trends or those unexpected results that are going to give you some aha moment that helps you do some corrections in your business. Okay, so this is the Power BI site. You get the idea. The slicers or the codes are meant for slicing. I'm going to take you now to a different tool. This is again the same data set, and I wanted you to see the data set over here. So we build this data set. The data set is really what we use to drive our reporting tools, and the data set has those slicers built into it, right? So if I look at the account code, account master might have account code 1, the description for it. I might have in here those hierarchies built up, balance sheet level 1, balance sheet level 2, balance sheet level 3. So these are those things that then are either directly reading codes out of JD Edwards, or they're being derived based upon codes that are in JD Edwards. So again, keep in mind, it's easy to take a single code in JD Edwards and make multiple codes in your reporting tool, and that becomes then a exponentially valuable analysis tool. In this case, I've got a set of codes on this graph that have a hierarchy. I've just put in account IS level 1, 2, 3, and 4. If I start drilling down, I can say, well, at the bottom level, I've got net income. If I want to drill into that hierarchy, I'm looking at level 2 now, and I've got income before taxes and taxes. I can drill down another level and say, you get the idea. As I move down and expand my analysis of this, my pre-built codes that were based upon category codes have given me a structure that gives me kind of a real easy way to create, sample trial balances, sample income statements, sample balance sheets. It may not be the product you want to present to your banks, because you might want to switch the signs on revenues and profits to be positive, but it does allow you to see quickly information about your business, and that's because we've built the codes into the model. So think about those codes and how they can be built up. I have some examples on the work orders. Again, our sample data set is kind of derived from a bunch of different places, but again, looking at, in this case, I've left the account codes, account code 1. That's another thing I'd like to point out is when you're doing reporting, if you think about the 901, it has a cat code 01. If you bring it into a reporting tool, you probably want to make sure you rename it so you understand where it's from, right? So I've got account code 01, that's the cat code 01 from the accounting table. If I scroll down and look at the work orders, I also have cat code 01 in work orders, but in this case, we've renamed them so it's a work order code. Again, that should make sure there's no confusion to the end user about what is the cat code. Better still is if I knew what work order code was, and I could say assembly method, right? So the cat code 3 really should maybe be called assembly method. The cat code 2 should be assembly tool. So again, renaming those so that end user can know what they are is really useful. You also might want to make sure that your description includes the provenance, and in this case, you can see as I hover over that, that's from the F4801 WAWR01, so cat code 01 on that table. But back to the idea of what the cat codes are. In this case, we've got some meaning here, right? A is assembly line 2, C3 would be machine 3. So again, the idea that someone who just saw that code may not need to have the description to understand what it is. And sometimes that's going to be very helpful to you, particularly if you got a report with lots of data on it and you only have room for the brief code and not the description, the A2 can be great, be really useful to kind of compacting information on a report. The idea here, there is no meaning. 3 is work order, 8 is nothing. Notice here there's a blank. I don't like blanks. This again, sample data, we just are living with it. But if a work order has a blank in cat code 4, did someone make a mistake or was it just unassigned? So we like to say best practices, blank should always have an assigned value, or default should be a number, X, let's say, or 0, and that should say unassigned, and then you know that someone just not looked at it. Another choice would be not applicable, which means if someone did not pick not applicable, that means that they actually looked at it and assigned that on purpose, right? So again, think about the idea that your default should be something that was untouched, and there should be then the values you want, and then there also should be a value that says this is not applicable to this particular work order, because there's plenty of times that doesn't happen. So again, on this last example here, where I've got maybe machines, these are mixing and matching. Paint makes sense. I don't personally like this methodology where you're taking an F8 and a P&T and 100. I think I prefer a standard. If you're going to use meaning, use meaning. If you're going to do random, use random. If you're going to mix and match, it's kind of wishy-washy. It looks to me like someone didn't actually design this well or didn't think about it when they built it. So those are some of my kind of examples out of the report. This is the same report we're looking at earlier. Again, properly used cat codes on your job costs, your sales are going to really help out analyze what your business looks like and understand where you need to make improvements. Let me go back to the PowerPoint real quick and just get back to where we're at and talk about lessons learned. Oops, I wanted to not be at the beginning. I apologize for that. I know you guys like my colors on my screen so much though. So lessons learned from my point of view. This is what just to revisit some things. Always require validation. Don't allow blank to be an option. What blank means is I don't know if that data was assigned or forgotten. Also, free-form text is going to be if you're creating a cat code, then free-form text is not a way to do that. You can't consistently report on it. So maybe there are places to have notes. The place to have a note is not in a cat code. When you're building a cat code, think about the whole system. Plan where you're going to have your categories on the account master, maybe on the business unit master, on the equipment master, how they will relate to each other, because they should. There's plenty of times when you're going to want to have analysis that crosses modules, and you're going to need to have thought your categories codes through so they work together. My advice would be to avoid too much granularity. You want enough detail that you can get down to analyze what's happening, but the more accounts or the more levels you have in your codes, the more likely it is that someone misassigns a code. And if they misassign a code, but back to my 3 Mile Island level, you're leading to confusion at the dashboard level of what's really happening, right? So make it as detailed as you need, but don't make it too detailed if you don't know where you're going to use that data for. So plan ahead, plan that way. Be careful about creating cat codes for elements that are unique, right? So cost types are unique. You don't make a cat code. So if you've got one labor cost code that is 1380 is your object for labor. Do you need to have a cat code for labor in that case? 1380 is labor. Your reporting tool can parse that out if you want to have a summary just by labor or not. But my advice is don't create duplicates where you have meeting in one spot and another meeting in the other spot. Your reports eventually will conflict because someone changes one but not the other, and you just want to make sure that you're not doing that. You will be modifying your cat codes in the future. They will certainly be changed. You should plan for it. So when you're thinking about the ranges, the sort order, always leave space in your codes or your values because your business will change and you will need to grow. The thing that's much more complicated that you'll want to think about carefully is this idea of slowly changing dimensions, right? So my old company on the business unit master, we're a construction company, so jobs might have a project manager and that project manager leaves the company. So I have to change that project manager. You always, there's often things that would lead you to think about, who was that project manager last year, or something that did change slowly. So there's ways to handle that. It can be quite complicated, but we do that type of dialogue with customers, but it's something to think through in your CAT codes of if they change, how are you going to handle those changes? So that's another thing to think about. I did promise to show you something that I forgot, so I'm going to bounce back one more time to the reporting tools, and I apologize that I forgot this. I said that we expanded with the idea of ones and zeros. So this is the example of a derived account code that helps drive efficiency in calculations, right? So we have in that account level codes that we've set for columns on accounts for expenses and gross profit. So you think about gross profit's not a number that sits in JD Edwards. It has to be calculated all the time, but you want it to calculate quickly. So one of the things you can do is create a code that's based upon gross profit that says every account that is revenue and cost, those get a little one by them. And then the actual code that does the summary, the model that we're looking at here ends up being in memory. It's highly compressed. But when I then want to calculate gross profit, I don't have to do the math of revenue minus cost. Gross profit then kind of falls out automatically because I've created these flags that say this is a gross profit account. So they sum up fast. That's again the idea that I want to design my codes with the end reporting tool in mind. How do I report? How do I make that report fast? If you click on an item and you get that little spinning wheel and people have to wait 5, 15, 25, 30 seconds, it really inhibits their desire to drill down to the next level, right? So you harm your analytics capability by not thinking through how do you maximize the speed and the power of those. In this case, we've created the gross profit flags that drive these calculations. So they're ones and zeros compress highly and also calculate quickly. So again, gives a very good response when we're looking at these calculated fields that don't exist in JD Edwards, but you want to be able to track and manage. So that's my presentation so far, or my full presentation. I've done everything that I intended to. Do we have any questions so far?
Yes, we do. Let me bring up the screen. So, okay, first question, Ben, what do you do if category codes have different meanings across divisions?
Oh, that's a good question. We've stumbled that multiple times with customers when we implement where companies merged or divisions both took a CAT code and assigned meetings. Again, the ideally best practice would be to separate those CAT codes into two different columns so that you don't ever step on each other. If you cannot do that, then make sure the ranges for those divisions are very different, right? So maybe put a prefix in front of the CAT code of A for the first division and B for the second division, so they always know that this code really applies to that division. So again, best practice, get two different codes, migrate them to two different CAT code fields. Second is to make sure you're going to define them so that they're uniquely different and very, very different with some sort of label or size. Is that question, Joe, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Sure. Okay, so next question I see, do you recommend object account ranges or account category codes for financial reporting?
Okay, that's a good question. And that, again, it has a depends to it. Um, we think the best option is to do an account category codes. It provides you the most flexibility going forward. You can handle exceptions much easier. You also can put that management into the hands of someone in finance who can get to the cat code set up within JD Edwards. It does make more management though. So if you have very consistent ranges, right? So your revenue range is 4,000 through 499, and it's always that way. Then ranges can be a really quick shortcut to setting those account codes up. Where I've seen this go wrong is when a company acquires another company, and the first company's range is 4,000 through 499, and the second company's range is 5,000 through 599. Then that makes those ranges not work that well. And then you probably want to consider the cat codes. But ranges can work, cat codes are more flexible.
Okay, good. Another question, how do cat codes relate to surrogate keys and dimension tables?
Cat codes, surrogate keys, and dimension tables. Well, that's a good question. When you've got a dimension table, that's where your cat codes are primarily sitting. The surrogate keys most often are not tied to category codes. They could be, that'd be kind of unique, but usually the surrogate keys are going to be tied to something that's unique on that record. In JD Edwards, it'd be like the 901 surrogate key would be based upon company, business unit, object, cost code, our cost type, object cost type, cost code, sub ledger, subsidiary. Of course, then in the 902 you got sub ledger, but the surrogate keys are going to be set on those table indexes much more likely than the cat codes.
All right, and I think we have time for one more, Ben. Okay, so this one says, in our system, UDCs are NCHARs, so there are spaces around them. Do you recommend trimming them down?
Yeah, I would, particularly in the reporting tool, right? So the way we do this, I come back to maybe this next slide, and we can talk about that a little bit. In Quick Launch, we're doing a couple different steps. In one case, we're reading step one, data preparation. We're reading all the data sets that come in from JD Edwards, right? When we do that, we're actually doing a lot of transformation of that. And we would recommend trimming the cat codes at that level so that you don't have spaces either one way or the other. So those NCARs, does that make sense? So I guess what I'm saying is you wouldn't necessarily need to do that in JD Edwards. It's probably cleaner if you do, but you certainly we would do that in our reporting tools so that those spaces don't become an accidental problem as you're trying to search for a particular code.
Excellent.
Other questions?
Thanks, Ben. There are a couple others, but I think we're about out of time. I want to make sure there's enough time for the drawing of our $50 Amazon gift card. So my team is picking a name out of a hat. We put everybody's name in a hat. So I'll get that in a moment. Couple things I want to mention. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah. A couple things I want to mention. And I lost my train of thought here. First off, thank you very much for attending the session. We hope Ben is enlightened everybody on UDCs and how to use UDCs. If there's any particular questions, Ben, I'm not sure if we have a contact slide, but you can contact us through preferredstrategies.com. We'll be happy to circle back and either arrange a personal presentation of Quick Launch and some of these tips and tricks with you and your team. And also, we're coming up is going to be Collaborate. I know it's next year in April, but it's already, I think it's going to be going live for registration and things soon. So look out for that. All right.
Joe, so before you move on, Joe, can I just talk about this real briefly? Because I showed the model. and we didn't really talk about it. But again, this is the idea that I mentioned the reporting tool a lot, right? So the idea of that reporting tool is where you can expand your user-defined codes. So you're kind of grabbing the codes in this extraction level, right? And you're translating them, either trimming them or parsing them out. But you're also then in this reporting tool compressing them into this memory model. That's where the speed comes in. That's where I mentioned on the formula that looks at gross profit. We're flagging that gross profit at this level, but we're then kind of compressing it and summarizing it at this level that makes the end tool, something like Power BI, work quick, right? So that, again, the system works as a whole. The reporting tool doesn't have to be Power BI, but the idea of extracting and then creating this, what it does for a company is creates a single report. You know, if you think about CRISPR reports, you make a model for every single report. What we're proposing here is you've got one model that feeds all your reports that has those defined measures and those defined consistent category codes that kind of feed your enterprise as a whole. So thank you, Joe. I apologize for that. I just
That's okay. That's okay. It's all. So here's our contact details. So if anybody has any particular questions, a lot of our information is already on the website. If not, you can reach out to us.